Hello and welcome to the Work Inspired podcast. I'm your host, George Lucas Pfeiffer. On today's episode, we have Tony Coles, who is the president of multicultural business and development for a company who knows a thing or two about podcasts, iHeartMedia. Tony's got so much great insight. We're going to be talking about relationships, retaining talent, navigating change. You're going to learn a lot. Work Inspired starts right now. Tony, thank you so much for being here. So excited to have this conversation with you in person.
Thank you so much.
Thrilled that you're here. So every guest that we have on the show, we like to start by having them tell us their professional story. How'd you get to where you're at today? And then we'll lead into what you're doing today.
So my story is a non-traditional path. I was either going to be a park ranger or a Methodist minister when I was growing up, because those two are so closely related to one another. But my father had this policy because his father had a policy that when you turned 16, you had to have a job. There weren't a lot of park ranger or minister jobs for 16-year-olds. And so I was looking for something to do. And I applied anywhere and everywhere. And the first place that I found was a local radio station. And they had a need for someone behind the scenes. And so I was working there just, after school, doing errands and anything. And one day, one of the personalities got sick. And they were looking for someone to replace him. And they literally called everyone that worked there. I was the last person they called. And the first person to answer the phone. And so I got an opportunity to go on the air there. Fast forward, I liked it. And so I started working there on the air and continued in college and worked my way up multiple formats, moving around the country a lot. And then finally moved into the management and the leadership side of things. But it was a very non-traditional path, but now I can't imagine doing anything else.
Industry of radio right now. It's kind of migrated to media, right?
Yes.
Starting off in a radio station, what does the business look like now? Is it diversified quite a bit? Is it still very much core recording in studios and radio shows? Just talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, radio is still the core. What's mainly changed is the distribution.
Okay.
And the fact that, we've gone from the concept of, a traditional radio. And now, when you think about it, for our company, we're on roughly 2,000 different devices, probably 150 different platforms. So whether it's your phone or streaming or traditional radio, it's more about the distribution now and the fact that you can listen anywhere on practically any device.
Is it kind of like, you hear the big TV networks have kind of had to rethink some of the content and the programming because of all the user-generated content on platforms like YouTube. We're on a podcast right now, but has the radio industry or the audio industry been as impacted? Because it does seem, there's a lot of podcasts, but it still seems like, to listen to great music or to hear, a highly produced radio show, or talk show. I'm not going to YouTube for that, right? Like maybe I'm going there for the music video, but has some of the disruption in network programming for TV, has that kind of been replicated in the radio space, or is it pretty separate?
No, they've obviously seen massive disruption. Yeah. We've had a disruption on the audio side.
Okay.
But at our core, when you look, we're still reaching 91% of America every single day. It's been more about the distribution for us, but at our core, we've not seen nearly the disruption that television has.
It's exciting because with all these other platforms, yes, it's probably operationally and logistically more complex, but there's way more places to reach people, which is an opportunity, right?
Exactly. Yeah, on average, people are spending 31% of their day with some form of audio every single day.
Wow. Interesting. Well, let's talk about that a little bit more in a minute, but tell me about iHeartMedia as a company. What does the company look like? How is the team structured?
It's a really exciting place to work.
Okay.
I've been there now 20 years. So I think that is a testament to how much I really enjoy the environment and the culture. We're the number one audio company in America. We have roughly 865 radio stations across America. We're in over 160 markets. Wow. Just with our radio side. From an events standpoint, we produce roughly 20,000 live events across America every single year. And we're also the largest podcast company in America as well. So a really diverse slate of offerings. And that doesn't include some of, we have premier radio networks where we've got shows like, Steve Harvey, The Breakfast Club, Sean Hannity. So a wide slate of offerings, and it's just a really dynamic place. So from a culture standpoint, when you think about that many cities, that many events, that many different types of content, it makes for an interesting day every single day.
So all these shows, are they all kind of independent? Do they operate almost as their own business units? And then there's a core iHeartMedia team that kind of does all the coordination and the promotion and the corporate type side? Or is there some thread that kind of weaves them all together from a company perspective?
From a company perspective, we like to talk about the fact that we have national reach with local activation, and that's really at the core of what we do. The 160 plus markets operate in the best interest of their local markets. Sure. But they have the backbone and the infrastructure and the resources of a national company, which enables a radio station in Chicago or a radio station in Grand Forks, North Dakota, to have the operational support, the infrastructure that they need, so that they can concentrate their time and energy on serving their local communities.
One thing we talk a lot about on this show, because of the industry that we're in and because of what we went through with the pandemic, and it is, how are people working today? Are they working in person? Are they fully remote? Can they do their job effectively fully remotely? Are they in a hybrid model, which most companies seem to be? I'm guessing the answer for iHeartMedia is complicated because there's so many different types of employees and programs and offerings. But is there a current way of working or policy that you guys have as a company as it relates to work style?
Well, I think like a lot of people, if you had talked to us before the pandemic and you said, can people work from home? We would have said no. And we learned very, very quickly what jobs we can and cannot do from home. So early on, even our air personalities, we found ways to get equipment to their homes, to have them working from their homes. But they were the very first employees to return back into the buildings full time, even during the pandemic, because of the nature of what we do and the critical information that our stations were providing. Since then, most of our offices have returned to normal. But again, when you think about the wide range of cities that we operate in, depending upon local laws, some were later to return to the office. Some, migrated back very quickly. But all of our offices and studios are back in normal operation. But we've certainly found certain job functions that can work remotely. But from a culture standpoint, we're really encouraging everyone to be in the office as much as they can, just for the collaboration. And I think we're seeing that in more and more industries now.
And especially in a field that creates great content and experiences, basically, from an audio medium, that would be important, I think. You know, it's important for all businesses, but I think in a field like yours, maybe even more visibly important, and the benefit of that collaboration is probably a little easier to comprehend.
Absolutely. And especially when it does come to the content side, the product side, that's all about creativity. And while we found great ways to do that remotely, a lot of times when you get really highly creative people in the room together, the innovation that comes from that is really powerful.
Definitely. Talk about your role as the president of multicultural and business development. What does that mean? What does that look like at iHeartMedia?
In my previous role as a division president, I worked specifically with our markets group. In this role, I'm able to unify all of the different assets that we have, again, from podcasts to events to our radio stations to our personalities, and look at that through a strategic lens on how are we solving problems for our clients. In many of our markets, they're already a majority multicultural as is. And finding ways to help clients connect with new customers. Because when you look at business growth in so many cities, 100% of the growth in the population is multicultural, but they haven't been marketing on a multicultural basis. So working with our radio stations that serve diverse audiences, working with our talent and our personalities, working with our podcasters. Some are multicultural themselves. Others just have a wide multicultural appeal. And helping clients navigate this, because for a lot of them, this is a new customer base for them. And everyone wants to be intentional. Everyone wants to do it right, but not everyone has the expertise. And for companies like iHeart, we have a long history in the communities. We have a long history serving these audiences. And so we bring a different lens to the challenges that our customers are facing today.
So really, when you say customers, it's advertisers and companies that want to use your platforms to reach audiences.
Correct.
And so you're looking for ways to take their brand or their advertisement and put and expose it to the right audience that, or new audiences in these markets. So the term multicultural,
yes.
How do you define that? Given some of the new attention on it, it's maybe changing a little bit or people are comprehending it differently.
That's a great question. And that's something that we talk about a lot, because there is the dictionary definition. And then what we're finding, whether it's the company that we're working with or the community that we're in, it means a different thing. So from the lens of what I do, our Hispanic and Latino audience, Black, LGBTQ+, we also have a very intentional focus on making sure that we're serving women as well. And then obviously a lot of people cross between all of those different groups. So really focusing on that. And then again, depending upon where you are, it can mean something very, very different.
I didn't have this in the question set, but one of the things that we're talking a lot about, it seems, this season on the podcast is disruptive technology and just the data that we have available to us now. Have you found that, because it seems like it would be somewhat of a complicated job to take all these different platforms and all these different audience types, and then you layer in the different geographies, and people's different perceptions and definitions, and to make the right matches or the most powerful matches. So are you guys finding new ways to do that using technology or new strategies to try to employ? Like what's working, because it seems like that's a tall task.
I mean, it wouldn't be a day in business without referencing AI.
Yeah.
So thank you for continuing that trend. But yeah, technology for our company, our CEO, Bob Pittman, has always been an advocate for trying out new technology, testing things. We've been working with AI for quite some time, but we want to be thoughtful about it. We want to be intelligent about it. And I think that's a big part of the debate right now is there are fantastic things that are coming from AI, but everyone also realizes that there is risk with that. And so we're being very thoughtful and intelligent about it, but it is absolutely one of the biggest changes and disruptions for all business, for all companies and ours included.
You would know better than I, but it seems like a key to success would be authenticity when you're taking these messages to market and making great matches. And that's one of the fears with AI is it's artificial. So maybe it's not authentic, so how do you use it, to your point, strategically, but not rely on it, to solve some of these important issues and opportunities that you've got in front of you. Right?
Yeah, for us and especially, when you have a CEO that was originally an air personality, he takes that authenticity very, very seriously. We all do. And we're in a companionship medium. And so that relies on people. There are also ways that those people can use AI, whether it's researching things, whether it's back-end operations to do that. And for the other part of my job, working in our news division, we're spending a lot of time focused on that because we're already seeing how, unfortunately, people are using AI to create deep fakes, to create voice replication, to spread, disinformation.
Yeah.
And so we need to understand the capabilities of AI so that we can spot what's real and what isn't. The public relies on us to tell the truth. We have to make sure that facts really are facts.
Yeah. And I think that's maybe one of the single greatest, well, there's a lot of challenges with AI, but not knowing if something's authentic or genuine or real. So maybe that's where the power of your platforms and the trust of your brand sets you apart, because in other platforms you might not know,
Yeah.
It's coming quickly, right?
It is. It's an exciting time. It's scary, but I'm genuinely excited by the capabilities of it for good.
Yeah, me too. So this is a nice bridge over, because in your business, I'm sure that relationships matter, right? How many people on the leadership team were on-air personalities at some point? You were, your CEO was.
Yeah, it's
Is that
actually,
common?
no, it's actually a very small percentage. Really? Most of them, most in audio, come from the sales side.
Okay.
That's the traditional path.
Okay.
I crossed over many years ago, and I'm fortunate to have the experience on both sides. But Bob is probably one of the most successful that's migrated from content to leadership.
Whether you come from sales and you're making relationships with advertisers, or you're a personality and you're trying to make form relationships with other guests or influencers or even your audience members, in your business, what does a strong relationship look like, and how is it valuable?
Well, first, at its core, relationships are everything. And genuinely, whether it's an air personality forming a relationship with their listeners, salesperson forming relationships with clients, and then for us in the leadership side of it, the business, forming relationships both with our listeners, with our clients, and because we are licensed by the FCC and have a mandate to serve communities, having relationships in the communities where we live, it's critical. So I see that connection and that importance. But certainly when I moved to the sales side, I rapidly saw the power of really strong relationships.
We talk about relationships a lot because they are so important. I think just, and I think they will be at a premium as artificial becomes more prevalent. We talked about that on the show too. The power of in-person relationships and trust and, and this kind of interaction, it will matter more. What have you found to be some of the keys to finding and keeping successful, long-lasting relationships in business?
So for me, and it's hard for me to wrap my head around the fact that I read this book 20 years ago, and it's still so relevant today. But 20 years ago, I read a book by a guy named Keith Ferrazzi called Never Eat Alone. Keith came from a very small town like I did. I really connected with his story. And he talked about working on a golf course. His dad got a job, helped him get a job on a golf course. And how he developed relationships. He was a kid, but he developed these relationships with businessmen, attorneys, politicians, and the value of those relationships. And what he learned, and this was the lesson that I took away from that book, was a lot of people confuse connections and contacts with relationships. And would you rather know 100 people but only 5 of them would return your call, or have relationships with 50 people and 45 of them pick up the phone every single time? And that really changed my perspective on, do I have relationships or do I have connections? And fast forward many years later, I ended up getting to work with Keith Ferrazzi.
Oh, really?
And
that's cool.
And he was a consultant for a company, and interacting with him on a frequent basis, and really then honing in and understanding, yes, there is a significant difference, and investing more time in building quality relationships for me has been a pivotal thing.
Clearly, some people you connect with more naturally than others, right? We all do.
Yeah.
I think you just said invest more time in quality relationships. So there's a lot of people you can get to know, right? But from your example of 100 people that won't return your call or 50 people that will, what would you rather have? So a smaller group, but a more meaningful relationships. Do you recommend kind of leaning towards people that you just more naturally have synergy with because it's going to be a more genuine, fruitful relationship? Or do you strategize on the people that you most could benefit from a business relationship and just say, even though we might not jive, I'm going to prioritize that relationship, I'm going to invest in that relationship, and I'm going to make it work?
I think everybody has a different philosophy on that and a different approach. For me, there was definitely a time in my career where I was focused on the strategy. But what I've learned, and I wish I would have learned this lesson earlier on, is I don't go into relationships with an expectation of getting anything out of it. A, I enjoy the conversations a lot more. And B, what I have learned is when you go into it without an expectation, and I think that we could say this, both personally and professionally, you just go in open to possibilities. You're right. You will discover who you connect with more. You will develop a deeper relationship with them. And if something comes out of that, fantastic. And if nothing does, you've formed a great relationship with someone, and you enjoy your time when you're around those people.
It's interesting because my next question is about finding and keeping talent. You could relay this kind of concept into hiring as well. You've got specific skill sets that you need to hire for, right? So you look at a resume and you're like, all right, well, this person meets the needs of the role, right? But then when you actually talk to the person and you get to know the person, that's when you're like, all right, are they the right fit for the culture of the company, right? Or the culture of my team? Do you do a lot of recruiting, or are you involved?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
Yeah.
So from your perspective, that's on everybody's mind all the time. I think on our side of the industry, we love now that people leaders are more involved in workspace decisions because that's the whole reason why we create workspaces.
Right.
But from a hiring, attraction, and retention perspective, what are some of the things that you look for that you've seen that have worked?
So I made a pivot in how I recruit people several years ago because I had a really interesting conversation with someone that changed the framework, because it's not just recruiting people, but it's retaining people.
Yes. Yeah.
And I was going through a phase where it seemed really difficult to retain, whether we had to make a change or whether it just wasn't the right fit and people left. And I was talking to one of my peers who seemed to just make consistently great hires. And I said, what is your secret? And he said, I don't hire based on someone's resume. The resume gets them, the interview, but too often we spend the entire time talking about their qualifications and their skills and their background. He said, but when you have to let someone go, you never fire them because of their resume. When someone quits, it's never because they didn't have the skills for the job. He said, so I started really focusing on why wasn't I retaining people? And it usually came down to, a character issue, a passion issue. They're qualified for the job, but they're not passionate about the job. And so his recommendation, and one that I followed, is look at the reasons why you don't retain people and spend more time focused on that during your recruitment process. And that was a really big change for me. I have many more conversations about, what are you passionate about? What are you motivated by? What are you not motivated by? And you very quickly identify, who's going to be that right fit. But something that I also spend a lot of time, and I share this with people that I know that are in the hiring, is as companies try to diversify. We always talk about the right fit, but part of making a diverse workplace, and that can be anything from age to race to identity to thought process. People aren't always going to be the right quote unquote fit, because if you want diverse perspectives, there's going to be a little bit of discomfort because you are bringing together people who are very, very different. And so as I go through that process, I'm also looking for who's the right fit from they're a great person to work with, and also who's a right fit because they bring a very different experience into the workplace.
It's insightful. And it's a great perception on the importance of a diverse team, I think. So early in people's career, it's common to bounce around, right? And we all hire people that are earlier in their careers. You can't have, I don't know too many companies that say, well, we're only going to hire people that have been in the workforce for 10 years. I was at a lunch event recently, and it was on Gen Z, and someone asked, how many people in the room moved around a few times early in their career. Every single person, I think, in the room raised their hand. So it's not like this is some secret,
Right.
But leaders often say, we'd love to hire people and retain them. And your career at iHeartMedia is 20 years long. That's kind of like what we are after. Find a high-performing person that's a great fit for the culture and that you can provide opportunity to move into leadership. And that's the Cinderella story, right?
Right.
But the reality is often it's beneficial for a young person to experience a couple different things. And if they can't do it all within a company, I think that's why you see people move around every 3 to 4 years, right? Retention is good and it should be a goal, but you also want to hire the person and make sure that their experience is great while they're there and they're developing, and not so much have an expectation and a severe disappointment if they take another opportunity, because that's that part of their life. And I had 4 jobs before I found this one. When you're hiring associates or younger people, do you have a strategy in place, whether it's a mentorship program or maybe it's just the cool nature of your industry and, radios maybe it's easier to retain people just naturally than some other industries. Do you handle people earlier in their careers in a different way than you do someone that's more experienced, where you can say, I'm going to form a relationship with this person and, and make sure they're a cultural fit and have more of an expectation that they might spend the rest of their career with your company or in your team.
I think from a selfish standpoint, we want to retain people and keep them 20 years, 30 years. And there are some people like that.
Yeah.
But I don't think that's a realistic expectation, as much as I would love that. But I do believe that if you're hiring young people, especially, that you're more likely to. And I'm also seeing a boomerang effect, not just for our company, but a lot of times where you hire someone early in their career, you invest in them, and they do go off and do something else. But because they had that good experience, they find a way back to your company. And I get excited about that. What I always encourage people to do is make sure that you're consistently having conversations about what your path is. A colleague of mine says all the time that usually when people leave to go to another situation, whether they've been tempted away or they just start looking on their own, they often do that because they don't see their future within your own organization. And so if you're not having conversations on an ongoing basis with your employees about their future, you can be assured someone else is having a conversation with them about their future. I have to remind myself of that on a consistent basis, because I think we get lulled into this sense of, oh, they're absolutely happy. But have we had that conversation?
The other thing I wanted to bring up was, and I touched on it a little bit in the beginning of the conversation, we were talking about some of the disruption in some of these industries, and radio being one of them, not so much as network TV, but managing through change. We could say crisis management, but pandemic was kind of the crisis management, right? I don't know what other crisis.
It was the ultimate crisis management.
We all figured out crisis management then. But change communication is one thing that we talk about a lot in our industry. It's when things are going to be different, how do we bring people along for the ride? And maybe even sometimes turn change or the fear of change into opportunity and progress. So what's your perspective on that?
It really, for me, it boils down to expectations and communication. Too often, those of us who are trying to drive change have this expectation that everybody is going to come along for the ride.
Sure, yeah.
Which isn't realistic. People inherently don't love change.
They resist it.
And also, too often, the vision that we have in our head, we don't effectively explain to others. And I think that it's that open dialogue. The here is what we're changing. Here's why we're changing. And most importantly, here's how this can benefit you. That's usually the missing piece. We know how it benefits the company or the organization. But if it doesn't have a benefit, a residual benefit to the employees, why wouldn't they resist? Why wouldn't there be that discomfort? So if you're having conversation before, during, and after change, it reduces that friction. It's never going to eliminate it. And I think that's the unrealistic expectation that we have too often. We need to go into it knowing there's going to be resistance. And something, our CEO talks about all the time is if everyone in the room agrees with the decision, then there's probably something wrong. So if you go into it knowing that and thinking about that, it makes the process a lot easier.
Well, the other thing I like that you just pointed out was there's change that happens to you and then change that you drive, which is sometimes transformation or innovation. But if your team isn't on the bus, or along for the ride or in the conversation, there's no difference. It's happening to them. And some things like the pandemic, we have to be able to react to change and challenge and navigate it and get through it. But when you're talking about new opportunities and transforming your business and that kind of change, it seems like what you're saying is include people in the conversation so that they're also part of the transformation and they're not being told this change is happening, now it's happening to you, just like the pandemic did, just like all these other crises that you didn't have a choice. So yeah, I like that perspective. I haven't even thought of it that way before. At the end of each episode, we usually ask each guest just for some recommendations because the people we have on the show, we're really fortunate to have had success like you. You already gave us one good book recommendation, but is there another resource that you found to be valuable in your career that you could share with others?
Sure. And I joke that I've probably sold more books for Keith than Amazon, but 20 years later, Never Eat Alone to me still is a very relevant business book. There is a podcast. It's a shameless plug, but I genuinely, even if I didn't work for the company, Bob Pittman has a podcast called Math and Magic, is with a business leader, a marketing leader. And Bob's philosophy is the greatest organizations understand that you have to have math, you have to have data, you have to have analytics, but you also have to have magic. You have to have culture. You have to have creativity. And the best leaders find a way to operate in a world of math and magic. And then the third one is a newsletter that I read religiously every Sunday morning. And my wife and kids know to leave me alone. 8:00. He's actually based here in Chicago, a guy named Rashad Tabakawala.
Okay.
And he has a newsletter called the containers of the past will not hold the future. I'm paraphrasing because it's a very long title. It's all about the future and trying to figure out a way to operate in the future without trying to confine it to the containers of the past.
That's cool.
And so he'll cover anything from, AI. He recently posed a question to AI a year ago.
Okay.
And then he reposed the exact same question today and just wanted to show how much, a year is a very small amount of time, but how rapidly it refined, it improved. And he's constantly doing that, looking at what we're doing today and will this still be relevant tomorrow? And why do we hold on to things that we know are going to be different in the future? And for me, it just, I live in a data world, so it's very easy to get focused on today. And every Sunday morning, that challenges me to think about how much time am I putting in this? Because it's not going to be relevant a year from now.
That's
so
really
those are my three go-tos.
Those are great. Something you're excited for in the year ahead?
Honestly, it's AI.
Yeah.
It still scares me, but I'm seeing so many innovative approaches to things that I'm really excited to see where this is going.
You wake up tomorrow and decide, that park ranger gig is really calling me, and you retire from iHeartMedia. What's some advice you leave for future leaders?
It goes back to what we talked about earlier in this, relationships and really developing relationships. I think back to, I never live in a world of regrets, but if I could go back and look at my career early on, I didn't understand the value of developing those meaningful relationships. And I certainly didn't understand what I talk about a lot is compounding. and how relationships build upon relationships, experiences build upon, and I looked at it much more through a transactional lens, as you said. This person can help me do this. I didn't look at the long range value of that, and I would spend more time focused on quality over quantity.
Great advice, great recommendations, awesome story. Thank you so much, Tony. This has been a great conversation, and thrilled to have your insight on the show.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this conversation, please take a moment to rate our show. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to the Work Inspired podcast so that you don't miss any of the incredible guests we have planned for upcoming episodes. We'll continue to find the best and brightest minds in business so that you can learn, grow, and succeed, and so that we can all work inspired. Work Inspired is brought to you by BOS, a leader in commercial working environments and a Hayworth best-in-class dealership. Experience our 360 approach and discover the team, tools, and techniques required to navigate the complexity of your next workspace at BOS.com. If you have ideas, feedback, or would like to be featured on our show, please email podcast@BOS.com. Thank you for listening. This has been a Workspace digital production. If you're interested in launching a podcast at your organization, please email info@workspace.digital for a free consultation.